Today's show is sponsored by Running Out of Breath, the unsung hero of trying to record a story on location. If you'd like to run out of breath on your own, you can walk outside devoid of adequate hydration for a long day of strenuous exertion in the heat, or you can visit www.IreallyDidRunOutOfBreath in this intro, you'll hear it later, trust me.com. Again, that's I drove all the way to Wexler County, USA, a 13-hour drive to be on location for our story, and I ran out of breath walking through the woods. I'm very, very sorry. .com. Which way is it? Through here?
Right this way. Don't mind the dog.
Thank you. Well, here we are. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Several Stories High. This is our third installment, and I'm very excited to be on location for the next tale, which is entitled Bells. If you already don't know from the title of the video / audio file / smoke signal / Guitars for Guns N' Roses. Anyway, I am here on location in beautiful but hot Wexler County, USA, in the city of Old Jupiter. If you haven't been there before, it's on the East Coast. It's a couple hours from Baltimore. Took me about a 13-hour drive from where I live in Metro Atlanta, and we just had a whole bunch of storms, so it is very muggy and very hot and very wet still, but it's still beautiful in a sad sort of way, I guess. Anyway, I'm sitting here with this little dog on the grounds of Old Jupiter Baptist Church Cemetery, which was at one point known as Paddockshire Hill Cemetery until the early 1970s when they built the church. And I'm here because of one name and one name only, and that is Loxley of Paddockshire, who's buried here, and whose name is shared with this dog right here, this little golden retriever. Girl? Boy? Yep, it's a girl. Hey, girl. Hi. Yeah, if you look on her tag, it says Loxley, and I think that is the groundskeeper John's dog, and Miss Teresa inside is the one that you heard earlier. They're both great people, and they manage the place, and they make it look very pretty out here. So if you hear any mowing or anything like that, that's what that is. Okay, I am now going to enter the gate and go to the cemetery itself. I don't know, I've always been fascinated by cemeteries. Well, maybe not fascinated, but I don't know. They always kind of made me really sad and a little bit afraid. I remember going to my grandfather's grave about 10 years ago and just kind of being overwhelmed by it all emotionally, just when you stand in the middle of so many people that have come and gone, that had lives of their own and this and that. It kind of gets to you, especially when you're out in the country and it's peaceful and whatnot. But okay, I gotta jump over this little creek thing. Hold on. Oh shit! All right, there it is. It's a single little headstone in the far right corner of the graveyard. All right, here it is, and it says, "Here lies Loxley of Paddockshire, son of Margaret Hester, keeper of the departed, friend to the living, 1787 to 1848. So, why I'm out here again? I don't know. I thought Loxley's story was an interesting one. A guy who was the groundskeeper for well over 30 to 40 years, depending on who you ask, is local lore and whatnot. It's very hot out here. But yeah, after talking to John and Teresa and going to the Old Jupiter Public Library, which is actually an Andrew Carnegie Public Library of Old Jupiter, rather. Doing a little bit of research. I couldn't find much on him, but what I could, he seemed to be a kind of a reclusive guy for the longest time. And towards the end of his life, though, he was known to be very outgoing and gregarious, and he was a friend to many in the town back then. I think he was a first-generation American. His parents were from Manchester, England, back when the town was called Paddockshire and not just a small district of Old Jupiter like it is now. So it definitely had a New England sort of vibe, even though it was much further south. Like I said, a couple hours from Baltimore. But yeah, the idea of cemeteries, but more specifically the idea of being buried alive, has always kind of been a freaky thing to me, and I think a lot of people would say the same. And historically, I think it's important, before you hear the story, that there was something known as a safety coffin that was made in the late 1700s, and one of the first guys to actually utilize it was Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick. And apparently, I mean, there's several different versions. Some of them had glass windows on the front to where you could see actually into it. Some of them were in mausoleums, but they all contained some sort of apparatus that had a bell and some kind of line attached to either the finger of the deceased or some other mechanism inside, to where if the person were to wake up, which has happened before historically, if they were to wake up from either some kind of long coma or misdiagnosis of death, they could alert the people above ground. I know it sounds freaky, but it was true. So I thought that'd be kind of an interesting idea for Loxley, and I wrote a story about him and just kind of what it would be like for him to be walking the very grounds I walk on all those years ago in the early 1800s. His mother, Margaret Hester, is actually buried right over here, and I always kind of wondered what they'd talk about. And be warned, this is a little bit of a darker tale. I wouldn't call it horror necessarily, and that's a word I hate saying because you have to sound really weird saying it. Horror. So sit back, turn the lights down low if you can, maybe light a candle, maybe light some fireworks. No, that wouldn't be good. But I guess the only thing left to say is you're listening to Several Stories High. I'm Nathaniel David Knox, and I've got a story to tell you. It's called Bells. Shall we begin? Welcome to Several Stories High, a narrative podcast featuring original stories from all corners of the spectrum. Fiction, fact, or perhaps more appropriately, somewhere in the great galaxies between. I'm Nathaniel David Knox. Let's see how high we can climb. Loxley didn't mind the dead. In fact, they're how he'd made a living for the past 10 years, guarding the little community of tombstones and crackled crypts of Paddockshire Hills Cemetery. He knew every grave by heart, sometimes talking to them as he strolled the grounds, like they were long-lost friends. Even his own mother was buried there.
"Mom?"
he said one night, casting down his lantern light on her tombstone.
"You really believe in all this bell hogwash?
Loxley loosened his collar and wiped his damp forehead, even though a brisk wind breathed through the trees and watchful bushes and thistles. Then he gently caressed the little rusted bell on its little wooden post by his mother's grave. The bell had a string attached to it, which led into the dirt in front of the headstone, and it was attached to the finger of his mother's body, just like all the other dead on Paddockshire Hill.
"Just don't know, Mom,"
said Loxley.
"All seems so far-fetched, even after all this time. Always has. As if every coroner over the last century was wrong on all accounts of the dearly departed in this place.
He paused.
No, come now, Mother, don't be that way.
He said to his mom's grave.
I took this night watchman bit so I specifically do not have to speak to any of the loons back in town. You know this. You've always known it. So come off it for both our sakes.
The wind shrilled again, and the moon was now so bright that it painted everything in a luminous blue and white. Loxley strolled around the grounds, carelessly flicking every few bells attached to the graves he passed, just like Mum's. It seemed the entire place had been terrified that they'd be buried alive over the years, and the bells had been installed just in case. Loxley spoke back towards his mother's grave as he continued to stroll.
You know, you always said I took after Dad with my shyness. And where's he now? Been years since I seen him. Probably drunk under a bridge or dead in a ditch all the way over the pond back in Manchester by now. Not so shy with the drink, was he? Oh, come now, Mother, stop hounding me. You've been gone for years, and still you hound.
Loxley made his way to the little row of crypts by now, flicking their puny bells.
I don't wish to know anyone in this bleak land, not a one. No. No. I won't go into town, Mom. I won't.
He reached the last crypt, running his coarse hand along the coarser stone wall, peering into the dark, open chamber with the raised stone sarcophagus inside.
Take Lord Dunsworth here. Dead at 80, a recluse. No doubt a full belly and a smile on his face when the earth took him back. A private funeral for a private soul.
His voice grew.
And what of these cursed bells? If life be so grand, why haven't you rang and come back to enjoy it more with me, huh? Oh, this wonderful world, yes, Mother. How about the rest of you?
Loxley yelled, surveying the whole cemetery with a scowl in the cold night wind.
Wonderful world, yes? Well, bully for you! Now roll over, all you lot. Roll over in your big naps.
Loxley stopped. Did his ears betray him? He strolled again. Then he stopped again. No. A ding. A jingle, faint and distant.
Mother?
He said, dumbfounded, walking back towards his mom's grave like a wide-eyed, moonlit child holding a shaky lantern.
Mother?
Yes, the bell attached to Mom's grave. It was ringing in little urgent bursts. As Loxley approached, there was another dinging somewhere behind him, and then another one in the corner, far off, and another down the way. Another! Ding! 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 Oh, the ringing! All around in the gusting wind! Loxley shrieked and dropped his lantern, falling to the ground and covering his ears from the deafening rings, the enveloping chimes from every dark corner of the grounds, all incessantly hissing and popping and tingling with their unique primal cadences.
No!
Loxley cried, his face in the dirt, drooling with his eyes shut tight. Then... Loxley looked up and around. Silence. No bells. No wind. Not a sound. Then something groaned in the night. It came from the last crypt.
Lord Dunsworth's mausoleum, there was something like a sliding sound, a sliding of a great stone. Loxley sprung to his feet and bolted out of the cemetery gates, shouting, Mom! I'll go! Loxley would run until he could run no more, through woods and deserted trails until he'd enter town. He burst into the first pub he could find, and he'd introduce himself as Loxley, the night watchman of Paddockshire Hills Cemetery, to anyone who'd listen. And he'd surely look up as he entered, too, when the bell above the door would jingle. This episode of Several Stories High was written, composed, and produced by me, Nathaniel David Knox. Thank you for listening. Additional thanks to John and Teresa of the Old Jupiter Baptist Church Cemetery in beautiful Wexler County, USA. And another shout out to Loxley the dog. Bells was first published in Red Weather Literary Magazine. You can learn more about me and the show over at severalstorieshigh.com. And if you have a chance, do consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. I would truly appreciate it. After all, was it not Alexander the Great that said, "Praise be to the gods for good meat, good wine, and a good review on Apple Podcasts"? I have no idea if he said that, to be honest. And finally, remember to keep up with the show on Facebook and Twitter. That's at SSHpod, or Shpod if you prefer. Just remember there's 2 S's. Until next time, I'm Nathaniel David Knox, and thanks for listening.